Freedom's greetings, Helldivers. Erevan here, and today I'm bringing you my ultimate guide to all the hidden mechanics in Helldivers 2. Have you been wondering what the numbers on your armor actually mean? How damage is calculated? Or have you heard the terms in videos like mine that confuse you, like durable damage or demolition force? Then this video is the one for you, as we're going to be going over every hidden mechanic, every obscured number, and every functionality Arrowheads told you not to worry about by obscuring it from the in game UI. If you watch this video to the end and you find this video unhelpful, then dislike the video as I've wasted your time and need to do better next time. If you instead learn something new that'll help you be a better Helldiver or find the video helpful, then you might as well like the video and sub to the channel for more guides and coverage of the game in the future. Out of respect for your time, as everyone's understanding of the game is likely at different levels, I've also chaptered out this video into sections so that you can skip around to the section you find most interesting and or helpful. With the obligatory opening statement out of the way though, let's get on to the meat of the guide. Okay, this is going to be a long video. It's a lot of mechanics, a lot of numbers, and it can get pretty confusing, but I'm going to be doing my best to keep the flow of this video as concise as possible. So let's start off by just talking about how our Helldiver's health and damage system works at the core level. Most video games have one static health pool, but Helldivers 2 instead has a separate health bar for each limb that then transmits damage received from that limb to a main health pool for increased depth and to create the game's injury system. This is the case for all living entities in the game, and your Helldiver is indeed one of those living entities, despite years of stim abuse. Your head has 85 health, body 65 health, arms 35 health, and legs 45 health. If any of these are reduced to zero, it results in an injury. Broken arms give you a multiplicative 50% penalty to weapon handling stats. Broken legs remove your ability to sprint and reduce movement speed by 15% additively per leg. A chest injury causes your Helldiver to take 1 damage per second and can no longer regenerate stamina. Head injuries are impossible because of our main health pool and how these pools interact with that main health pool. You see, all of these individual limbs can be reduced to zero, but that isn't what causes our Helldiver to actually die. Our main health pool of 125 receives 150% of the damage received to the head, 100% of the damage dealt to our chest, and 85% of the damage dealt to our arms and legs. Even when depleted to zero, our limbs continue to receive and transmit damage to that main health pool until it's depleted, which will finally result in our Helldiver's demise. When it comes to elemental damage like fire, gas, and explosives, all of these deal damage directly to your main health pool and ignore the limb system altogether. I also want to clarify here before we move on that the servo assisted armor passive's 50% extra limb health only decreases the damage applied to your arms and legs by 50% and has no impact on the damage your main health pool receives whatsoever. You will suffer arm and leg injuries less often, but you cannot take any more damage than normal before actually dying. Now let's talk about how armor factors into all of this. Armor functions as a multiplicative mitigation on all damage received, but armor values of 100 or less do not apply their mitigation to any damage received by our head hitbox. Only armor values of 129 or higher apply mitigation to the head. Armor values below 100 functionally amplify the damage received. 50 armor receives 125% damage from all sources, 64 armor 118%, 70 armor 115%, and 79 armor receives 110.5%. At 100 armor, you receive 100% of all damage taken, functioning as our baseline. Beyond 100 armor, we actually mitigate damage received. 129 armor receives 85.5%. 150 armor, 75%, and 200 armor only receives 65% of the damage taken. Let's do a quick example to make sure that we're all on the same page. A warrior swings its claw at a Helldiver, which deals 55 damage, hitting them in the leg. The Helldiver is wearing 150 armor. The damage is mitigated by the armor, so we multiply that 55 damage by 0.75, reducing it to 41.25. All damage calculations in Helldivers 2 round down, so that means we take 41 damage to the leg, meaning our leg has 4 of 45 health remaining, meaning it was not broken. That 41 damage is then multiplied by the hit location before being applied to our main health pool, that again being the one that will actually cause a death visible in the bottom left of your screen. As we were hit in the leg, we multiply the 41 remaining damage by 0.85, equaling 34.85 rounded down to 34 damage. In this example, we then have 91 of our 125 main health remaining. It's also worth mentioning that the more main health your Helldiver is missing, the heavier the Helldiver breathes, causing the arms to sway, causing a further penalty to your weapon handling stats. Pro tip, during the dive animation, you ignore all penalties to aim from injury, as they all require your arms to sway, but your arms are locked in position during dives, meaning desperate last gasp diving can keep your aim straight long enough to get you out of some tough situations. All of this being said, this is only how standard physical damage is calculated. Elemental damage like fire, gas, and explosives all deal damage directly to your main health pool, mitigated by 50% multiplicatively, alongside any armor mitigation or amplification if wearing light armor. As far as how armor passives like Fortified, which reduce explosive damage, factor into this, the 50% from these passives are multiplicative with all other mitigations. So any explosion damage would then filter through your armor mitigation, your base 50% mitigation, and then finally a further 50% mitigation from the fortified passive. This is the same way any elemental resistances are applied as well from other passives, such as fire resistance or gas resistance. Finally, there are two last potential multiplicative mitigations that can be applied. Helldivers with the Vitality Booster active receive 10% less damage from all sources, causing some effects to round down to abnormally low numbers, such as the self damage from the DE Sickle or the self damage from the Dead Sprint Booster, in addition to making you immune to Terminate Acid and chest wound damage. Note that Vitality Booster used to be 20% resistance, but it was nerfed down to 10% and an unknown patch number. Helldivers with the experimental infusion booster under the effect of a stim receive 10% less damage, although experimental infusion does increase the sway of your aiming reticle by 25% while active. All of this comes together to form a conclusive reason as to why lighter armors are typically favored over heavy. There are lots of ways to reduce the damage your Helldiver receives beyond just armor, but there are no ways to improve your movement speed besides lighter armor, experimental infusion, and jump packs. So sacrificing mobility for survivability more often than not doesn't feel worth it when you can find survivability through other means besides armor, except when dealing with objectives that require very little movement around the battlefield, such as defensive operations. And just to clear up this myth I heard, no, the armored looking pieces on your Helldiver's suit do not mitigate damage better than the rest of the limb. It is purely cosmetic. If you want to know the specific breakpoints behind what attacks are lethal to what part of the Helldiver's body wearing what types of armor, some dude has gone above and beyond to make some pretty easy to follow spreadsheets that can tell you just that, allowing you to work out exactly how much survivability additional armor really grants you on a case by case basis. TLDR though, light armors and the B24 Enforcer come out on top more often than not as far as breakpoints are concerned. I will leave a link to these spreadsheets though down below. Okay, so that was how the armor and health system works. Let's talk about some obscured weapon stats not mentioned anywhere within the game's UI and clear up how armor penetration works. First, you have to understand how armor penetration functions. Every weapon has a level of armor penetration referred to in the game as light, medium, heavy, and anti tank. But there are more armor levels and penetration levels than that. In fact, there are 11, and they are more commonly and easily referenced numerically AP0 all the way to AP10. If at any point the armor penetration level from now on referred to as AP is lower than the opposing armor class on the enemy referred to from now on as AV, then you'll get a deflection indicator. The shot will ricochet if the projectile is not explosive or plasma based and deals 0 damage to the target. If the AP of the attack exceeds the target's AV, then 100% of the weapon's damage will be dealt. And if the AP of the attack matches the AV of the opponent, then 65% of the damage will be dealt. The numerical values for all weapons and stratagems is kept updated on the helldivers.wiki.gg. This is what I refer to as the good wiki. The other wiki is outdated and pretty useless, but wiki.gg has literally everything you could ever want to know about our weapons as well as the enemy's armor and health. Armor penetration isn't an inherently hidden mechanic in itself, since you do get feedback in game to tell you when you're doing no damage via deflection, and the gray hit markers are meant to indicate dealing only 65% damage. But what goes entirely unlisted is weapons having different AP values depending on the angle you hit the enemy's armor at. This typically has no effect on penetration for most weapons, as we only experience no penetration when hitting at what the game classifies as an extreme angle, something pretty difficult to do or find an example of. What's very easy to give an example of, though, is something that leads to a lot of frustration in regards to utilizing, for example, the heavy machine gun. The heavy machine gun is AP4, but at a large angle, its penetration is reduced to 3. This is much easier to accomplish than hitting at an extreme angle and leads to a lot of consistency issues with this weapon. This is also why we saw Reddit posts being made about orbital rail cannon bouncing off Bile Titans, as before a patch removed angular penetration from stratagems, this hidden mechanic was the cause of this nonsense. So if you've ever been frustrated due to this inconsistency, you now know why this is happening. The wiki also shows the AP values based on the angles on each individual weapon for your ease of reference. Our next topic is completely unmentioned within the confines of the game itself, though, only sometimes making a brief appearance in the patch notes, which is really the only reason we ever caught on to its existence in the first place. This being durable damage. Your weapon's true damage is determined by up to 3 different damage numbers, despite there only being one displayed within the game. This in game display is always the ballistic damage in addition to the explosive damage if the weapon has an explosive damage element. Durable damage is not visualized at all in game, and is typically 10 to 30% of your ballistic damage, but there are outliers. Enemy body parts have a stat called durability. The higher the durability percentage of the target you are hitting with the weapon, the greater percentage of your durable damage utilized in the calculation versus your ballistic damage. Let's run a quick example so you can see what I mean by this. The Diligence Counter Sniper has 200 ballistic damage per bullet and only 50 durable damage. Let's say our target is the back thruster of a gunship. Gunship thrusters are 80% durable. This means we take 80% of our weapon's durable damage, in this case, this would be 40, and only 20% of our ballistic damage value of 200, leaving us with only 80 actual total damage. But wait, the gunship's thruster is AV3, and the Diligence Counter Sniper's AP is 3. As our AP meets the AV of the target, we only deal 65% of our damage, leaving us with 52 total damage. The wiki also has all this information on how durable or not durable an enemy body part is, and durable damage has a massive impact on how good a weapon is or isn't against a target. As another quick example of how this can lead to player frustration, if you're unaware and uneducated about this mechanic, the MG43 has an AP value of 3, so you might get the impression that it could deal some decent damage to the back of an enemy tank, considering their weak point is only AV3, and you're getting gray hit markers. But that isn't the case, because while the MG43's ballistic damage is 90 per bullet, its durable damage is only 23. And as the tank's vent is 100% durable, we only deal our 23 durable damage per bullet, mitigated by the armor by 35% down to only 14.95, which is then rounded down to 14 damage per bullet instead of what you would expect to be 90. You can check exactly how much durable damage every weapon and stratagem in the game deals, you guessed it, on the wiki, but not in the game anywhere. Durability as a mechanic can be frustrating, but it's also a big reason why explosive weaponry like the plasma purifier and crossbow are considered some of the best primary weapons in the game. You see, explosive damage ignores durability as a mechanic and always deals its full damage in an area of effect. The area of effect of the explosion varies based on the weapon used, but as a general rule of thumb, there is always an inner and outer blast radius. Within the inner radius, maximum damage is dealt, while in the outer radius, the damage degrades all the way from maximum down to 0 at the edge, meaning explosives more centered on the target deal greater damage than those that are off the mark. As an extra tip, I want to quickly mention that all explosives, including enemies, follow these same rules, and being prone in the outer radius of an explosion gives your Helldiver a temporary further multiplicative 90% resistance to that explosion. So diving away from explosives can greatly increase your chance of survival. Explosive damage can and almost always does have a different AP value than the ballistic portion of the weapon, and this is never mentioned in the game UI. For example, the Plasma Scorcher deals 100 ballistic damage with an AP of 2, but a further 100 explosive damage with a 1 meter inner radius and 2 meter outer radius with an AP level of 3. This kind of thing you would only know after significant trigger time with a weapon, or, yeah, after checking the wiki and seeing this was the case. On the topic of explosive damage, the mechanic that keeps it from being completely OP and superior in every way to ballistic damage is most non tank class enemies have explosive immunity tags on all of their limbs, or even sometimes heads, like how the Alpha Commander's head is immune to explosive damage. This is done as a gamey way to balance explosives to not deal their damage multiple times by hitting multiple limbs. Although this is not done to enemies like Bile Titans and Chargers and Hulks, all of which sustain explosive damage multiple times if the area of effect is large enough to engulf several parts of the body, as they have enough HP to tank it, so it actually works here. Another unlisted vital statistic that basically defines every preferred primary on the Terminid front is staggering force. All weapons in the game and all explosives for that matter have some amount of staggering force, and every enemy in the game has some amount of stagger resistance. Generally, a stagger force value of 30 is the sweet spot to inflict, which I refer to as heavy stagger, to medium targets like Devastators and Alpha Commanders. Heavy stagger makes it so the enemy basically can't fight back in any capacity for a solid half of a second or so while a heavy stagger animation plays out. This amount of stagger is regarded pretty universally by the community as the most useful and is found on meta defining primary weapons like the Arc 12 Blitzer and Plasma Purifier. While more medium values of stagger between 10 and 20 points can actually be considered to be detrimental in some cases due to this causing a flinching effect instead of a stagger. Flinching enemies don't really slow down or stop what they were doing at all, but the flinch often causes their hitbox to jitter out of the way of any potential follow up shots. This unfortunate amount of stagger force is found on the Plas 39 accelerator rifle, for example, which only has 20 points, and is the reason the 3 round burst feels so terrible. Well, one of the reasons, as the first shot is typically never enough damage on the first headshot to kill, and the first hit flinches the target's head hitbox out of the way of the second and third shot, just as one example. The staggering force of every weapon and explosion is recorded on the Helldivers 2 wiki for easy reference. Next, let's talk about the fire and gas status effects and how they work. Weapons like flamethrowers, sterilizers, and lasers deal damage in a standard way any other weapon would, utilizing armor penetration, ballistic, and durable damage, but they apply a damage over time effect as well. The burning effect deals 50 damage per second for 3 seconds, dealing a total of 150 damage. Although, as long as an entity is in contact with the source of the burning effect, it will continually refresh the duration of the burn. If a Helldiver catches fire, it can be put out by going prone, although the burn duration is doubled for us, assuming you do not go prone. Gas damage works in a very similar way, although it deals 25 damage per second, lasting 10 seconds per application for a total of 250 damage. And just like the burning effect, will refresh the duration of this effect as long as the target remains within the cause of the gas debuff. In addition to receiving damage, the gas effect also causes the enemy to stumble around attacking aimlessly due to a further status effect attached to the gas effect, this being referred to as blinded. It's an unreliable form of crowd control since the enemy's attacks can still harm you, unlike stun effects, but with the added benefit of a longer duration and some damage being dealt on top. With both the fire and gas damage, it's important to realize these damage over time effects only deal damage directly to the main health pool of your enemies. They deal none of their damage to any limbs or heads under any circumstances, meaning they are extremely ineffective against targets with larger health pools, but greatly effective against enemies like hunters with relatively small ones. Remember, I'm talking specifically about the damage over time effect inflicted. This has nothing to do with the actual stream of your flamethrowers, which of course do deal their damage to limbs. Just keep in mind the burning effect is not helping you out at all if you're trying to roast a charger through the head or legs, as that status effect is only chipping away at the main body, making this additional DPS pretty unreliable against large targets. Something else that's going to be important to understand moving forward is that all status effects are applied in Helldivers 2 just like in Souls games. There is an invisible meter or threshold being built up gradually as the target receives damage capable of inflicting the debuff. This is important to understand before we talk about stuns. Enemies have more innate resistance to stun than other status effects, typically based on their size category, with chaff enemies like hunters and troopers being extremely easy to stun, medium enemies like devastators and alpha commanders being moderately difficult, and tank class enemies being very difficult to stun, or in the case of tanks, factory striders and bile titans, outright immune to the effect. Stunning weapons have hidden amounts of buildup and are not created equal. For example, the poor little Pummeler SMG only builds up 1 point of status strength per hit and only causes the small version of the stun effect, which only lasts 1.5 seconds. While the Halt shotgun stun rounds cause 1 status buildup per pellet, firing 20 pellets for a total of 20 status strength, and causes the medium version of the stun effect, which lasts 3 seconds. These subtle differences in status buildup and duration can be tracked on the wiki. I think we are entering the territory of learning more from browsing the wiki than the in game UI and tooltips, which I would say is not okay. Moving on to an all important stat that really should be referenced somewhere on at least our stratagems, it's Demolition Force. Demolition Force is a hidden stat found on all of our weaponry that dictates what terrain, objectives, or buildings the weapon can or cannot destroy. Standard ballistic weaponry, like, say, the counter sniper, have only 10 points of Demolition Force, so buildings don't explode when you shoot them, and doors don't get broken open on impact. While the crossbow has 30 Demolition Force on the bolt itself, meaning it can destroy doors and enemy spawners on impact. Demolition Force is also the reason behind why an airstrike can destroy Bile Titan holes, but a recoilless rifle cannot. This is because the airstrike has 40 Demolition Force, and the recoilless only has 30, while the hole requires 40 to be destroyed. Another great example is automaton jammers, which can't be destroyed by a recoilless rifle's 30 Demolition Force, but can be knocked out by the ultimatum due to having 50 demolition force. Ever wondered why you can't 500 kg bomb a gunship fabricator or orbital cannon? Well, that's because it only has 50 demolition force, and you need the Hellbomb's 60 demolition force to destroy them. The demolition force of every stratagem and weapon in the game has been recorded on, yep, you guessed it, the wiki, and not in game. Considering this is loadout definingly important at higher difficulties, I would really like to see this stat at least added to the in game UI. Next, let's talk about weapon spread factor. When the reprimand released, a hate mob formed for the weapon due to it being deemed too inaccurate. Bueno, pillo. Many claimed video game spread factor on weapons has no place in this game. But what I think many to this day don't realize is every single weapon in Helldivers 2 has some amount of spread factor or deviation from where you're pointing the weapon, and will not always, sometimes never in the case of some weapons, shoot exactly where you're aiming. Generally, pistol sidearms have between 25 and 30 MRAD worth of spread, assault rifles from 1 to 4, marksman weapons typically less than 1, submachine guns between 20 and 25, except the reprimand, which sparked the controversy for having 50, finally having enough to be extremely noticeable by the community, and shotguns far more due to being, well, shotguns. Spread factor is not currently viewable on the wiki, but it is maintained on the Helldivers 2 declassified Google Doc found within the stream community spreadsheet post. I'll leave a link to this below for your viewing pleasure. Found also on the declassified Google Doc is the amount of damage fall off your weapons have at 25, 50, and 100 meters. Something also mentioned nowhere in game is that all weapons besides laser based weaponry and the Jar 5 Dominator exhibit some form of damage fall off, with plasma weaponry and shotguns suffering the highest degree of fall off and precision rifles the least. This creates an interesting problem for the accelerator rifle, for example. The game's first primary sniper, in quotes, categorized weapon is unfortunately also a plasma based weapon, and despite being meant for long range combat due to this fact, loses 68% of its 250 ballistic damage at 100 meters, making it next to useless at long range. If you didn't know this, you were probably frustrated as to why this weapon feels so terrible at range despite being a sniper. Now that you do understand, you're annoyed, but at least you know why you're mad and can tell Arrowhead with me to patch this poor weapon's damage fall off. Generally, damage fall off only has a high impact on damage for plasma weaponry and shotguns, but not just because shotguns lose a lot of their damage at range. You remember that talk we had about damage rounding down always? Well, because shotguns are firing many pellets at once, each pellet is suffering a point of damage loss pretty much immediately upon leaving the barrel due to this mechanic. Like how the cookout fires 20 pellets at once for 16 damage each. Pretty much immediately, you lose at least 1 damage per pellet, bringing the weapon's real damage immediately from 320 to 300 before we get into durable damage, armor, and so on. Generally, shotguns still own at close range regardless of this, but information like this feels comparable to playing a game of Call of Cthulhu. Except the source of madness isn't an unknowable being from beyond our understanding, it's staring deeper into the spaghetti code behind this game. All right, that is all of the hidden mechanics in Helldivers 2. Wait, no, melee weapons ignore armor penetration entirely. You can deal damage through any surface because the damage is dealt like a dot. Okay, that was all of them in one neat, concise video for your viewing pleasure. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope Arrowhead considers making at least half of this information available within the game itself in the future, as a lot of it is important for understanding the game well enough to be successful on higher difficulty missions, which many creators, myself included, say are more of a knowledge check than a skill or gear check fundamentally. So making that knowledge more easily accessible than hunting down a third-party wiki or Google Doc would go a long way to helping players progress to higher difficulties and lessen the frustration while they do so. Thank you to my coffee supporters who help keep the channel going, and thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you next time.
Deep on him.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
Reinforcing!
Oh, there's an incendiary mine there!